Good morning and welcome to the Killik & Co Market Update. You've probably spent this week being bombarded with emails about data privacy, and this is all due to some major new European legislation that comes into force today. It's called GDPR, or the General Data Protection Regulation, and it applies to all companies that are handling the data of EU citizens. So even overseas companies that are handling EU data will be subject to this new regulation. The new rights for consumers include being able to ask companies to see all the data that they hold about them, and also the right to be forgotten, or the right to ask a company to delete any records they may hold about you. So we've been looking at the costs of complying with these regulations, and I think it's fair to say that these costs are very high indeed. I know that our own compliance department has spent many months preparing for these regulations, and if we look at the Fortune 500, apparently on average companies have spent $16 million so far getting ready to bring these new regulations into force, and each company has employed on average 10 new full-time employees on an ongoing basis just to deal with these new regulations. So the cost of complying for this are very, very high indeed. And in fact, some smaller overseas companies have simply said they won't be dealing with the EU anymore because the cost of complying are too high. And one concern for companies is the level of fines that could be applied if companies do breach these regulations. So these fines have been set at a maximum level of 4% of global revenue. So for some major international players, these fines could be very high indeed. Let's have a look at a couple of examples. So Netflix, a global company that we're all very familiar with, their global revenue in 2017 was $11.7 billion. So if they get hit with the maximum fine under this, that could be $468 million, a huge number. Facebook, they could be hit with a fine of $2.3 billion, and Google, or the parent company Alphabet, they could be hit with a fine of $4.4 billion. So we're talking about huge numbers here, and it's not surprising that companies are working very hard to comply with these new regulations. However, it's not all bad news, and I think these new regulations do present an opportunity for some businesses, particularly companies that are in the business of helping other businesses get ready for these new regulations. And one of these is Microsoft. So I went onto Microsoft's website yesterday, and it was covered in headlines and comments about how Microsoft can help companies to get ready for GDPR. So Microsoft is saying that instead of dealing with GDPR themselves, companies should be putting their data into the Microsoft cloud, and Microsoft will handle it for them. And this is something that we expect to see more of going forward. We expect more smaller companies and medium-sized companies to be using cloud-based services so that they don't have to personally handle new regulations such as this. So definitely something to keep an eye on there. And elsewhere, we did see quite a lot of weakness in the auto sector on Thursday, and this is due to more comments from Donald Trump. So he's now launched an investigation into the level of car imports into the US. So he believes that US manufacturers are losing out because the US imports so many more cars than it exports. And that's true if we look at the numbers. So for 2017, the US imported $179.6 billion worth of cars, and it only exported $53.6 billion worth. So Trump wants to bring down that level of imports. And the fact that he's looking at this, the announcement was made on Thursday, it did cause weakness in a number of car manufacturing shares. For example, Honda and Toyota over in Japan, Hyundai in South Korea, and BMW and Volkswagen in Germany. So this could be bad news for these car manufacturers going forward if Trump does impose some new regulation. But as yet, he's just looking at the options, so it is a situation to keep a close eye on. And elsewhere, we've seen a bit of general market weakness, largely due to Donald Trump pulling out of the North Korea summit. He said he did this because of increasingly hostile comments coming out of North Korea, and the market did fall when that was announced on Thursday. However, there is still a chance that the meeting could take place at a later date, and this morning we have seen European stock indices rising, so I don't think people are overly concerned at the moment, but it's definitely a situation to keep an eye on. Moving on to the week ahead, it's fairly quiet in the UK because we have a bank holiday on Monday, but we will be looking forward to results from Salesforce in the US and London Metric Property here in the UK on Wednesday. That's it from us. Have a great bank holiday weekend, and we'll see you next Friday.